Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all, whether you're watching this stream on YouTube or on Rumble today. I'm very happy to have with me John Lackland. Am I pronouncing your surname correctly, sir?
Lachlan, yes, you are. Yes, Lachlan, yeah.
Lackland, you are the
Yeah.
director of Forum for Democracy International and lecturer in politics and history. I've been on your show, I believe, 2 times. This is your first time on this podcast, so I'm really pleased to have you to share your wisdom with the audience of Syriana Analysis.
Well, I'm very honored. I know how much you're appreciated and how much your other guests are appreciated. So it's an honor for me to be one of them.
Thank you. I'm humbled by your words. Actually, I wanted to have you on this show because it's important during which I believe these are historic times, and
Yes.
especially for the European continent, which seems that they have decided to go to the opposite direction of the US approach. Today, yes, the EU imposed new sanctions, the 16th or the 15th packages of sanctions against Russia. But I want to take one step back from what the United States is doing at the current moment. I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong. I was always reluctant to say that there is a difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. Like, I always believe that there are major headlines that both parties, like there is a uniparty when it comes to geopolitical strategic issues, for example, such as a war of this sort in Ukraine. So we've been witnessing this proxy war, let's say, starting from 2014, even before that, when George Bush promised or supported the candidacy of Ukraine to join NATO. And then the US spent billions of dollars to prepare for, let's say, a color revolution. It was the Obama administration. And then Trump even accelerated the arm deliveries to Ukraine. And now there is a Biden administration increased the pace of this conflict, which led to the Russian offensive against Ukraine. But now we are seeing not a slow shift. It's a complete U-turn in the American approach in this case. What am I missing here to understand this U-turn in the US foreign policy?
Well, by the way, I think you can go back beyond 2008 when George Bush and the British forced the idea of NATO membership for Ukraine onto reluctant Europeans. I say forced because for many years I've been in touch with Václav Klaus, the former Czech president, and he wrote a piece for us on fvdinternational.com recalling that meeting. He was in the meeting when NATO membership was passed, and he's recounted for us how France, Germany, and obviously the Czech Republic, of which he was president then, were against it. But you can go back beyond then to 2004, because the Orange Revolution in 2004 was already about Viktor Yanukovych, the one who was then, of course, overthrown in 2014. And that was done with full American and European backing. It's very important to emphasize the European dimension, because if 2008 was the year when Ukraine was invited to join NATO, 2008 was also the year when the European Union created its Eastern Partnership. The Eastern Partnership was supposed to bring into the orbit of the European Union Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, and the three Caucasus republics, So this process has been advancing in parallel. You've said Democrats and Republicans alike, but also the United States and Europe alike. They've been on the same tracks. What has changed? What have you missed? Well, I'm Kevork. You're a very intelligent observer. You're joking with that question. The victory of Trump, the second victory of Trump, is an internal revolution in American politics. Because Trump won not just against the Democrats, but also against a very substantial part of the Republican Party, and of course above all against the American deep state. That is the magnitude of Trump's second victory, that he managed to win in the teeth of opposition from, when I say deep state, from the whole of the state. Yes, the deep state, so the CIA, the secret services, and so on, but also the ministries, the Congress, the Pentagon, all the rest of it. So the significance of his victory is immense, and it is an internal revolution, therefore, which does, yes, break the uniparty. I don't think we can talk about a uniparty anymore, at least not on relations with Russia. Of course, they all agree on Israel, but on the Russia issue, there is now a very substantial disagreement. And why and how do we understand this? Well, because the other side overplayed its hand. It was Russiagate, Russiagate, Russiagate from 2017 until 2019. And then when Russiagate folded in 2019, it was the first impeachment of Trump over Ukraine. We must never forget that. He was impeached over Ukraine. I often show to my students the moment in the Colonel Vintman testimony to Congress, to the House of Representatives, where he is asked to describe the moment when he heard this alleged suggestion or hint or whatever it was Trump is supposed to have said to Zelensky. And he's asked by a congressman, what was your reaction? What did you think? And Vintman said, I feared that our Ukraine policy was under threat. In other words, he betrayed his superior, the American president, because he disagreed with the policy. He said that's what he said in his own testimony. And Trump hasn't forgotten that. And only yesterday, I think, Trump said, well, the Ukrainians shouldn't have started the war.
Yes.
That's almost an act of revenge, if you like, for the Ukraine impeachment, I would say.
Actually, when I followed the developments in the US, especially after the 2020 elections, I had the conviction that Trump is going to have a comeback. But I also believe that the Russian war in Ukraine helped Trump in one way or another. And I'm not saying that there is an agreement between both sides. What I'm saying is the successful Russian special operation, let's say, or offensive against Ukraine has also helped Trump in terms that this was a democratic war. This was initiated basically by when the 2014 coup happened, it was under Obama, and then the Biden relationship with the companies and his shady business relationship with Ukraine. So Trump also capitalized on this, let's say, disagreement with the Democratic Party in order to gain more credits among his people. And also, I also see there is a increasing number of Americans are tired by this endless wars of the US, and Trump just used this momentum in order to present itself as an anti-war candidate. And I mean, in Ukraine, he is. We don't know yet what he's going to do in the Middle East, because he's still presenting absurd plans of the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. But when it comes to Ukraine, I see that the success of the Russian military helped in one way or another for Trump to come into the White House again and wage his, let's say, this inner war against the deep state. I see that there is a new deep state being formulated in the US, and the old one is dying at the current moment. But this was also one of the factors, was the Russian offensive against Ukraine.
Well, Mike Bentz, who I expect many of our viewers know and follow, and I'm sure you do, argues very convincingly that the Ukraine war was itself a CIA operation. I mean, of course, it was a CIA operation, the Maidan coup and so on. But what he means by that is that the underlying energy conflicts. Hunter Biden, obviously, as we know, famously worked for a gas company. The underlying energy conflict was itself, this is Bentz's argument, was itself a CIA operation to take over the gas market, basically in Europe, to take over transit and then ultimately to sell more American gas to Europe. Now, Trump on this issue, he's a man of the deal. He's a businessman. He wants America to make money. So we don't know, he might be a bit ambiguous on this, because obviously he'd be very happy to have Europe as a captive market. But I think that, as you suggested in your question, he probably now, unlike in his first term, does indeed understand the deep state ramifications of this. So if I referred to the Vintman episode and the 2019 impeachment, in fact, this goes back a lot longer, and he knows, in other words, where his friends are and where his enemies are. As far as the Russian military operations are concerned, yes, of course. because if Russia had folded, NATO threw everything it had at the Russian army, and has clearly failed. But if Russia had folded in another scenario, obviously, yes, Biden would have, been able to claim victory and so on. So yes, I think the 3-year-long war of attrition, which has led nowhere, at least not for Ukraine, yes, did help. It was an objective fact on the ground that he wanted to take cognizance of and put an end to.
Yeah, there's a legit argument that the people who are suspicious, let's say, of Donald Trump say that Trump wants to pursue a diplomatic approach with Russia in order to adopt a reverse Kissinger-Nixon strategy, like in the 70s when the United States capitalized on the rift between communist Russia and communist China in order to increase the rift, let's say, and worsen the relationship between both sides. And he's trying to do similar thing, but reverse. But from what I see here, first things first, this is truly a wishful thinking. If there is any, if there's any belief in Washington that China and Russia may separate from each other again, and for Russia to trust the collective West completely, that's delusional. Secondly, it seems that this is not a reverse Kissinger strategy. I don't know what shall I call it, but the rift is actually happening between Europe and the United States, and not between Russia and China.
I completely agree with that. I think I agree with both your points. I think the idea that it's possible is completely for the birds. In any case, the Kissinger parallel doesn't work because the Sino-Soviet split predated Kissinger's overtures to Peking. There was already a split. He was simply moving into a vacuum, if you like, that was already there. They didn't engineer the Sino-Soviet split, and it's unrealistic to imagine that Russia and China will separate because of the depth and resilience of that relationship, which has developed now over decades. I mean, it includes, as everyone knows, absolutely gigantic. In fact, I think the biggest infrastructure in the world was started more than 10 years ago, a north-south pipeline delivering gas to China, which I remember reading somewhere was the biggest infrastructure project in the entire world. So yes, there's no chance at all that alliance will be broken. And you're right, obviously, to say the lack of trust. The Russians, by the way, have been, Lavrov and so on, and Medvedev have been very, very sharp, quite cruel, I would say. Well, cruel, certainly very, very forceful in their statements about Europe. I met Dmitry Medvedev in November. I was in Sochi, and we had 2 hours with him. And I asked him, how would Russia, assuming that Russia wins on the battlefield, how will Russia deal with the existential humiliation of Europe? And because I at that point thought that the humiliation, the withdrawal of NATO membership for Ukraine and so on would be a step too far and would be impossible for the West to bring about. But now I think things have moved on. But I didn't really get an answer in November for reasons also connected with translation. But now we have got the answer because Medvedev has been tweeting in his customarily colorful language about how Europe is a frigid spinster who is now realizing it's difficult to get a husband. And Lavrov, I'm sure you've seen, made very, very strong statements about people have to face up to their responsibilities. So yes, the Russians have absolutely no trust. That's for sure. But even if they had trust, even if they trusted, for example, Trump or whatever, we all know that American administrations change, and that there'll be midterm elections in 2 years, and then Trump won't represent himself apparently for a third term. And so even leaving aside the issue of human trust, they know that the situation can be fluid. Which, of course, is another reason why they wouldn't dream of breaking up with China.
Which is exactly what was going to be my next question. Like, even if the current, let's say, administration in the US would like to freeze the conflict or strike a or establish a new security architecture with Russia, the next administration could simply backtrack. I mean, the US has a history of doing so. I mean, even under Trump, he canceled the nuclear deal, for example, with Iran. So from the Russian perspective, it would be very, I think they would be doubtful. They would be very suspicious, and they would be very careful, let's say, to diminish their relationship with other countries on the expense of their relationship with Europe or with the United States, because things could change very rapidly. But what I'm seeing here, it seems that the development in the US also reflect on Europe. Like we have soon in 2-3 days elections in Germany, and the AfD alternative for Germany is scoring between 22-25%. The CDU is 26-28%, etc. And the AfD says, like, we want good relationship with China, Russia, and the United States for the benefit of Germany. Like this realpolitik has once again been emerged from the liberal establishment, let's say, which is breaking in front of our eyes, and the populist parties are rising in Europe.
Well, we'll see. I mean, let's see what happens on Sunday. I mean, the CDU has consistently been ahead of the AfD. You've implied that they're quite close, but as far as I know, all the polls have shown the CDU to be in the lead. I would be very happy to see a new political force emerge in Germany, as in other countries in Europe. But I'm skeptical that it's going to happen, because I see instead across Europe a very substantial, decades of very substantial brainwashing. I like to remind people that a year ago, the whole of Germany was in the street demonstrating against the AfD because of this nonsense about Potsdam, or wherever it was. They had this supposedly secret meeting with Martin Sellner. The whole of Germany was in the street. There were demonstrations all over Germany, just as there were demonstrations all over Britain against a far right which doesn't exist in Britain. And meanwhile, France, where I live, has, as we know, a very powerful or relatively powerful opposition party, the populist party, the Rassemblement National. But at every stage, they trim and they put water into their wine, as the French say. So I don't. I mean, I can't rule it out. You must never rule anything out in politics. And yes, the system is under very, very severe strain. The whole world is collapsing for the liberal consensus. We saw the chairman of the Munich Security Conference have an online or live mental breakdown. Mental breakdown. That was a mental breakdown. That was not. I've often criticized European politics for being effeminate, which is a different subject. But I've often used that word, effeminate. This was not an effeminate moment. This was not a man engaging in some emotion like, I don't know, at the Oscar ceremony. This was a mental breakdown. That man is having a mental breakdown. And his mental breakdown is symbolic, I think, of the European political class, which is indeed having a collective breakdown. But
also it applies the famous quote that weak men bring war, like miserable times, right?
So the system is under massive stress. All the illusions which have been created now for decades, and I say that because the system is indeed, that's what the system is. It's a system of illusions. Yes. That's what European politics is. It is the creation of narratives, the maintaining of narratives, the creation of illusions. Those are now coming crashing down. But the system still has a lot of life in it. You know, back when Trump was elected in 2016, people said, "Oh well, populism, Brexit, Trump, it's all over." And then in 2017, we had the election of Emmanuel Macron, who is still in power now. 10 years later, well, it's what is it now? 7 or 8 years later, and will be in power for several more years' time. So the system still has a power left in it, and of course, a huge amount of institutional inertia and capacity.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I mean, maybe there'll be a huge surprise. But even if there is a huge surprise in Germany on Sunday and the AfD comes first, then they'll simply do what they did in Poland, because in Poland the PIS party came first and the losers ganged up against them.
Yeah, nobody will form a coalition with the AfD in
They
Germany.
did it in France. That's what happened in France in July last year. So it'll happen in Germany. They'll just have another grand coalition.
Or cancel the elections like they did in Romania.
Or cancel the elections like in Romania, yeah, exactly.
The other day when I watched this meeting of the European leaders, I mean, I think there were 7 or 8 leaders, not the 27, 28 leaders. When they meet, what do they speak? I mean, they all speak the same thing. Like, so they have created an echo chamber for themselves. There is no a diversity of opinion among these leaders. It's the same opinion and they're repeating to each other. And this creates a situation that we have the Ursula von der Leyen. Today she says, I welcome the agreement on our 16th package of sanctions. The EU is clamping down even harder on circumvention by targeting more vessels in Putin's shadow fleet and imposing new import and export bans. We are committed to keep up the pressure on the Kremlin. To me, as an outsider, it sounds really absurd. This is the definition of madness. How many times you have to repeat the same policy and expect a different result?
That's right. Well, broadly speaking, what you say is correct. Excuse me, but there are, of course, there is some internal dissent within Europe. Both Hungary and Slovakia have firmly said they don't want NATO membership. They're both NATO members and EU members. Hungary, Viktor Orban in Hungary plays a rather, I would say, devious game, not entirely straight bat, as we would say in English. In other words, he marches his troops up to the top of the hill and says the end of sanctions, with the era of sanctions is over, and then Hungary ends up voting for them, albeit with certain derogations for Hungary. But that doesn't hide the fact that there are substantial disagreements. The European system, the elites absolutely detest Viktor Orban, and were Călin Georgescu to be elected in Romania, I'm sure they will detest him as well, as they detest Fico. But broadly, yes, of course, out of 27, you have, 24 countries, 25 countries who say exactly the same thing. And as my friend Peter Lavelle just said on my own show a moment ago, the president of Lithuania or the prime minister of Lithuania and the prime minister of Portugal are more or less interchangeable. You wouldn't notice if they swapped seats.
By the way, since you mentioned your own show, by the way, guys, I have put the links of his personal account in the description below and the account of of the Forum for Democracy International in the description below. So you can also watch his show and his conversations. I was just watching you live before you joined my live streaming. I think it's important to support the people who are arguing sense. Like when you listen to someone who is making sense, you feel it in your brain, right? And this is what strikes me when I listen to the European officials nowadays. Like, for me, it doesn't make sense. What are they saying? So, for example, the other day I was reading an argument. I would like to hear your thoughts about this. That this should be seen, what's happening now between the US and Russia, as an opportunity for Europe to pursue an independent path from the US. And in this case, they could call China in this case and as a mediator between them and Russia, and offer a security architecture to Russia instead of doubling down and increasing the sanctions against Russia, which is very clear that it harms the European economies. One. Secondly, it's quite clear that Russia is not going to lose this war. And without American support, the Europeans do not have enough money to continue this conflict against Russia. So it's just a dead end. But they are still insisting on the same approach, whereas they have the opportunity to pursue an independent path now, when the US is separating itself from the rest of Western Europe, at least in this case. But as you mentioned, the with the director of the Munich Security Conference when he started when he started crying. It feels so absurd that even the audience started applauding him and hugging him there. So it's like a collective mind issue and
Yes.
psychological issue persists there.
Yes. Well, I think it's deeply absorbing, this that moment, as you say, both his own mental breakdown, his own collapse, and yes, the reaction. You know, this elicited applause. Okay, fair enough. You feel sorry for someone who's crying and so on, but then yes, all the hugging, all the frankly very adolescent emotion, the emoting. The reason why this is so important is that European politics for decades has been based entirely on creating narratives, entirely on creating fictions, entirely on emotion, and not on realism. And so when those narratives and that emotion, when the rug is pulled and when the narratives can no longer be sustained, then indeed an entire illusory world collapses. And that's what Christoph Heusgen clearly was experiencing when he broke down. He knew, as a diplomat, a German diplomat, I assume he's about 60 years old, he spent his entire life in the Auswärtiges Amt. He could see that his entire life, if you like, his entire life's work was in ruins. And the narrative is collapsing, not just because of America and Trump. Trump, of course, by the way, in first place, but also his ministers, particularly Hegseth and of course J.D. Vance, they are deliberately puncturing the narrative. When Trump says things like Ukraine shouldn't have started the war, or oh, the Russians have fought for that land, so they might as well keep it, he is deliberately aiming, I'm sure, at puncturing the woke, politically correct narrative.
Yeah.
But the narrative isn't collapsing only because of him, although of course, yes, he's kicking the anthill, giving several kicks to the anthill. It's collapsing also under its internal contradictions. I mentioned Viktor Orban a moment ago. I said slightly negative things about him, but we all remember how in July, when Hungary took over the presidency of the European Union, he immediately went to Moscow, to Kiev and Moscow, and then Peking and Washington on a peace initiative, and he was vilified by the entire European establishment. They all criticized him. The Commission refused to go to Budapest, as it normally does at the beginning of each new council presidency, and everyone dissociated. There were all kinds of pompous statements dissociating themselves from him. Well, 6 months on, and now these same people who attacked him for a peace mission are saying they want to be around the table for the peace mission.
Yes.
So the narrative collapses under its own ridiculous and again very infantile contradictions.
Yeah, very, very good point, actually. How do you see that this talk started in Saudi Arabia and not in any other place? And how do you see Zelensky's trip to Turkey, and he wants for Turkey to be also part of the negotiations?
Well, I think that the fact that these talks took place in Riyadh, Alexei Pushkov in Moscow made this point very well, is also symbolic, as if we needed another layer of humiliation of Europe's irrelevance, because traditionally the great meetings between American presidents and Soviet leaders took place in Europe. They took place in Helsinki in the 1970s. They took place in, obviously, Geneva. They took place in Reykjavik. They took place in Malta. The end of the meeting between, I think it was already George Bush father by then, with Gorbachev on a ship off Malta. Obviously the 1970s, 1971 Helsinki conferences, Reagan and Gorbachev in Helsinki, even Biden and Putin in Geneva at the beginning of Biden's presidency. And now suddenly Europe is no longer the place. The world has moved, and this is a process which, of course, has started at the beginning of the 20th century with the First World War, where Europe already began to lose its previous domination of the world system to the profit of the United States of America, and then obviously after the Second World War to the to the benefit of the Soviet Union, which controlled half of Europe. And this is therefore a very, very long-term process, which has now, I would say, almost reached its accomplishment with the fact that these meetings don't even take place on European soil.
Yeah, some people are asking about your show, and I already, now you can see on the screen, guys, Forum for Democracy International, right?
Thank you.
And
yeah,
you can find it on YouTube, because people
it's called
say
the
some of
we
them.
call it the Forum. Yes, we call it the Forum, the show.
So the link is already, guys, in the description. So if you missed the link, you can find it there. What about Turkey's statement, or Erdogan's statement, that he supports the territorial integrity of Ukraine and won't accept to give up some of these territories to Russia? Does Turkey have any leverage over this?
I'm sure, Kevork, you know about Turkey far more than I do, so I'm slightly reluctant to respond. I think that. Well, firstly, Erdogan, of course, plays not just one double game. He plays about 5 or 6 double games at any one time. I personally don't think that his statement that Turkey supports the territorial integrity makes the slightest bit of difference. I don't think anybody, I'd be very surprised if any Western country formally recognizes the annexation of the territories in Ukraine.
Yes.
The Western powers from 1945 onwards, they put little footnotes in their in all their diplomatic communiques, saying that they didn't recognize the incorporation of the Baltic states into the Soviet Union. What difference did it make? Didn't make any difference at all. It was all for show. So, I mean, maybe they will. I don't know. You know, these are incredible times and lots of unexpected things are happening. But I don't think that him saying that is particularly significant, because I think it's meaningless. After all, nobody recognizes the incorporation of Crimea, and yet Crimea has been incorporated into Russia now for more than 10 years. What his real intentions are, I don't know. I mean, he's obviously got his own regional issues, both with Ukraine and with Russia, his near neighbors. I think you're probably better placed than I am, actually, to know exactly what's going on inside his head.
Oh, actually, at the end of the day, there are facts on the ground. Even if, as you mentioned, Turkey or the European Union and the United States, they will not formally recognize these regions as part of the Russian Federation, but Russia will be basically the ruler of these territories. And similar thing happens with Israel. Conquers more territory inside Syria. Many countries pretend that they are against this occupation, but it becomes normalized after a decade.
Nobody recognizes the occupation of the West Bank, or everyone criticizes Gaza and so on. What's going on in Gaza? It doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, in Syria as well, the Golan Heights, and now we have the Qunaytirah.
So recognition is just totally irrelevant, in fact.
Yeah, I will show you a few videos now just to hear your thoughts. We will start with Zelensky. Zelensky says basically, if the US stops giving us money, we will demand at least 250 billion from Europe.
Yeah. Money, good. Give us 250 billions, which are here in Europe, frozen Russian assets.
He's asking for the frozen assets of Russia in the European Union. How can the European Union take this step?
I don't think so, and nor can Britain. The British have been very vocal, British ministers under the previous government. There are voices under the present government in Britain. I don't know whether this money is in London or in other parts of Europe, but I think that I don't see it happening, for the simple reason that if it happened, then these cities, London and so on, would disappear as.
It's a declaration of war, right? If they seize the assets,
you can't be an international, the international financial center, because London is, in fact, I think, the biggest. and steal people's money. If you steal the money, you'll get the money. Yes, there'll be court cases and whatever, but you may have the money, but you will lose however many more hundreds of billions. Other people, other countries, including Middle Eastern ones, Saudi Arabia and so on, have put into the City of London. So I'm struck, indeed, by the fact that these calls to steal the assets have been going on now for a long time and have not yet been actioned. And I also think that, I know you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but the Zelensky number really is getting a bit stale, isn't it? More and more money, more and more weapons. That surely, and I've said this now for more than a year, we know that Ukraine cannot survive without these weapons and this money. It's on life support. Yes. And that in itself is an admission of defeat, because really no country, I don't think, of course, in previous wars, countries have been helped by other countries and so on. But if they state publicly, as Ukraine has been doing now for well over a year, and as have its other allies, that the country couldn't survive for more than a few days without this support, then that surely is a statement of defeat. Yeah. I don't want to overwork the terribly overworked Second World War analogy. I'm getting absolutely sick of it. But in 1940, after the fall of France, yes, Britain depended on Lend-Lease. It depended on arms and money coming from America, but it didn't say if this stops, we will collapse. Yeah. That wasn't the rhetoric, and that wasn't, in fact, the reality. Yeah. So Zelensky is, in fact, damaging his own credibility, I think, by this constant begging.
He's also becoming more unpopular among his people, like in Ukraine. I think his popularity was on the peak at the start of the war. I understand, with the nationalistic, let's say, sentiments, and also there is an invasion of a country and everybody supported the president. But now, after hundreds of thousands of dead Ukrainians, and also with the decimation of the economy and the talks about basically looting the earth minerals of Ukraine, basically taking away their ports, their infrastructure, Ukraine is basically gone. Like I can't see it as an independent country any longer. And now Trump says that he demands Zelensky to hold elections, and one of the Telegraph articles says, but this could oust him from the office as the price of these elections. If he holds elections, he could be ousted. And Trump even made a video statement about this. I would like to show you this video. Just a second. I will just bring you, I think, like this. Yes, no, this is the one. So this is Donald Trump, basically. He says yes. The following. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
We're hearing that Russia wants to force Ukraine to hold new elections in order to sign any kind of a peace deal. Is that something that the U.S. would ever support?
Well, we have a situation where we haven't had elections in Ukraine, where we have martial law, essentially martial law in Ukraine, where the leader in Ukraine, I hate to say it, but he's down at 4% approval rating, and where a country has been blown to smithereens. You got most of the cities are laying on their sides. The buildings are collapsed. It looks like a massive demolition site. So many of the cities. They haven't done it in Kiev because I guess they don't want to shoot too many rockets in there. They've done it 20%, but they haven't done it 100%. If they wanted to do it 100%, it would probably happen very quickly. But you have cities that are absolutely decimated. And yeah, I would say that, when they want a seat at the table, you could say the people wouldn't the people of Ukraine have to say, like, it's been a long time since we've had an election. That's not a Russia thing. That's something coming from me and coming from many other countries also. Ukraine is being just wiped out. Look at what's happening to the cities. There are cities, there's not even a building standing. It's a massive, you talk about Gaza. It's literally, these cities look like Gaza.
So, elections in Ukraine.
There are many, many things to say about that. But I think the thing that Trump said just before his remarks about the buildings is the the key point, independently of the opinion that we may have on Zelensky, his support, whether or not it's right not to have elections and so on. The technical point is surely overwhelming, that what's the point of negotiating with a man whose mandate has expired and who may well indeed lose, because obviously his successor, if he were to lose, would come in and say, well, we don't agree with this, we want something else. That is just, again, it seems to me, as he says, it's not a Russia thing. Trump said that. He's dead right. I mean, it's just a matter of fact. Everyone talks about a durable peace, but if you try to negotiate with someone who may well be out of office in a few months, then what's the point? There's no point. There are many things to say about the whole situation with Zelensky. The first is that I mentioned a few minutes ago narratives and the creation of fiction. Zelensky is an actor, and his role since the Ukraine war started in 2022 has been to promote illusion and create narratives. That's why in the first year of the war, he spoke at the Glastonbury Rock Festival, at the Venice Biennale, at the Frankfurt Book Fair, at the Cannes Film Festival, at every single cultural event you can imagine, because his role was, as an actor, was to bolster support in public opinion for the Ukrainian cause. The reality is that one of the things that happened in 2014 in the Maidan Revolution was that the constitution of Ukraine was changed. The revolutionary power, the revolutionary forces that seized power in 2014 went back on the 22nd or 23rd of February 2014 to the 2005 constitution. That, by the way, had been at issue in the Orange Revolution. And the earlier constitution, the 2005 constitution, took away power from the presidency. That was the whole battle with Yanukovych, that he had a presidential system and the opposition wanted to control the parliament and therefore the country. So this whole putting forward of Zelensky is itself incompatible with the outcome of the Maidan Revolution. Plus, by the way, it's a minor detail and it's just, there's so much else to say. But the fact is that the Ukrainian constitution, even in the one that's now allegedly in force, does not allow the president to stay in office beyond his term. The only body which can extend its term is the parliament. The Rada, not the presidency. And as in every single constitution, there is a provision for an interim presidency when the presidential term has either expired or come to an early end. And that is that it passes, if I'm not mistaken, to the Speaker of the Parliament. So his situation is completely untenable from a constitutional point of view. But more importantly, as I say, it's the actual realistic point, which is that what happens if in a few months' time he loses the election. And don't forget, when he was elected in 2019, is that it? He was the peace candidate. Yes, so there may well be another peace candidate. And of course, that then would radically change the whole internal dynamic of Ukraine itself. It's a subject which, by the way, we're going to be talking about on my own forum in a couple of weeks' time.
You know what bothers me, John? I'm not European. I'm from Syria, and what bothers me is the hypocrisy in Europe about these claims that they champion liberal democracy around the world. And if there is no democratic values and democratic elections in country A or country B, then the European Union or European countries will not deal with this country. Right. But in Ukraine, they've been telling us that this is a liberal democracy, and now you see what happened there. I mean, the opposition parties have been banned, politicians have been detained, the Russian Orthodox Church has been also banned, and basically Zelensky established himself as a tyrant here in Ukraine. Plus the journalists who were prosecuted by Zelensky himself, one of which is Gonzalo Lira, who died in the prisons, who is not even Ukrainian, right? And at the same time, I see Syria. You have the founder of the Al-Qaeda offshoot in Syria is recognized now by the European officials as the president of the country, whereas in Syria we haven't held any elections, and he just selected himself as a president. This is what bothers me.
He said he won't have elections for 4 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, of course. So this is why I see that European Union is losing its credibility
Absolutely.
as this power which champions democracy, liberal values, etc. around the world. Nobody is buying this, that the European Union is there just to champion these values. Nobody believes this is a value-based policy. It's just opportunistic, right?
That's right.
Whether it's West Asia or in Ukraine. Therefore, when I see someone like Ursula von der Leyen or Kaja Kallas, like how dare they still talk about these values when nobody believes them any longer? Like, are they talking to a mirror? Can't they see that nobody believes them?
Well, that's right. And I mentioned earlier, I said the narrative is collapsing internally, and never mind what's happening outside, but internally, because the contradictions are unbearable. You've mentioned the Syrian case, which is a spectacular example of this. The way that, well, in this case, it was British people, but Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell. Rory Stewart is essentially an MI6 operative, former member of parliament, a former minister, I think, as well. Went and they were so delighted to meet the new. I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name, but the new strongman in Damascus.
His name is Ahmad Shara, but he's
Jolani.
Jolani, yes.
That's it, yes. So they were delighted to meet Jolani, and they, in their tweet, he described him as a fighter turned president, as if that was fine. You're a fighter, you seize power by force, and then you're a president. But there's another example, Kevork, which won't have escaped your attention, and which also, of course, concerns the Middle East, and that is the International Criminal Court indictment of Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. The ICC is a European creation. It's financed essentially by European Union governments and by Britain. It was set up by them in 2000. The Americans aren't part of it. They are very hostile to it. They were hostile to it even before the Netanyahu indictments. The Russians aren't part of it, the Indians, the Brazilians, the Chinese, the list goes on. So it's a European court, essentially, based in Europe. And what do we see? Well, we see only yesterday or the day before, Jean-Noël Barrot, the French foreign minister, refusing to say whether France would arrest Netanyahu if he came to France. We have seen Italy return. This is not necessarily a point about hypocrisy, but they returned a senior Libyan official, I think a senior police official, to Libya, even though he was also wanted by the ICC. Tajani, the Italian foreign minister, said, "Well, we do what we like. We're a sovereign country." So yes, their own claims, for instance, about the international rule of law, about values, and so on, they don't even respect them themselves. And yes, that is that lack of credibility, that damaging of the brand. It's the same in Britain again. Brand Britain is severely damaged now, and brand Europe is too.
Yeah. John, last question about the neoliberal or liberal forces in Europe. Like we see now in the United States, there is this brutal war against the liberal wing of the establishment and cutting the funding. The Dodge is coming after USAID, NED, and other liberal organizations, which were like using taxpayer money with tens of millions of dollars all around the world in order to spread their
billions,
yeah,
USAID, billions.
Exactly. I checked in Armenia. Armenia has 3 million people, and USAID spent $5 million on the LGBT community, which has less than 5,000 people in Armenia. It's crazy how much money they have spent, for example, there on absurd projects. Like, do you also anticipate similar crackdown, let's say, on the liberal organizations and these NGOs in Europe, or it's too early to speak about this?
Not at all. I'm afraid it's exactly the opposite. It's part of the doubling down. I think that these organizations, these NGOs, will now go to Brussels for money, because Brussels has also been giving large amounts, maybe not as much as USAID, but they have a slush fund as well. They've used it to influence elections. That came out recently. So I think I suppose my pessimistic scenario, which I've mentioned, is that Europe doubles down and that the the empire, if you like, the liberal empire, there'll be a translatio imperii, as we say in Latin, will, having been chased out of the United States of America, will in fact now come and settle and put its roots down, or put even more roots down in Europe itself, including financially. So that seems to be the scenario that's playing out. Although, of course, as we've said, the empire is itself under great internal stress. But I think there's a very, very strong chance that Europe will seek to profile itself, continue to seek to profile itself, in this case against America, as the outpost of these liberal values, which, as we know, is a joke.
Yeah. John, what a pleasure to have you today on my show and share your insights with the audience of Syriana Analysis. I truly hope that soon we would meet also in person.
I hope
and
so too.
We could have a discussion also face to face.
That would be great.
I really enjoyed this chat with you guys. As I mentioned, his personal account and also the account of Forum of Democracy International is in the description below. I will now add the YouTube channel as well, the link in the description below, so you can also watch his show there. If you like this content, if you like this conversation, the easy thing to do is hit the thumbs up, leave a comment so that we can navigate through the algorithm and also the suppression of YouTube. And if you like to do more, you can become a patron, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis, or there are other different means in the description below. And I will see you guys tomorrow, 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. Peace be upon you, upon your families, and peace be upon you, John. And I will see you soon.
And you.